Hello, humanoids. I'm so glad you've decided to join me for dinner. What are we having? Well, I was thinking adventurer under glass. Oh, no, don't go. After all, you're just my type. Oh, positive. Oh, why do you look so grave? You don't like my puns? Sucks to be you. Oh, no, but really, you should stay. Sit down. I don't get that many visitors. It seems I'm a bit of a pain in the neck. Oh, you're dead set on going, are you? Well, if you must, before you go, would you like to meet my pet duck? His name is Quackula. I actually really like that one. I'm sorry. Okay. No more puns. I promise. No more puns. Okay. So, hello humanoids. Halfling Hannah here from halflinghobbies.com. These are actually really hard to talk through, and I'm not entirely sure how vampires do it. I feel like I have a giant lisp. But today, we will be talking about why vampires suck in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Here we go! Alright, humanoids, let's talk about vampires in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Okay, I can't do these. I'm so sorry. I have to take them out. Give me just a second. Oh my gosh, that's so much better. I wonder if that's like what really, really old vampires do. They're like, you look tasty. Hold on just a second. Let me put my fangs in. Alright, now then, where were we? So stupid. I don't know what's wrong with me. Anyway, so vampires in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. You can find vampires in the monster manual on page 295. They are a legendary creature, lawful evil, with a 13 CR. That is challenge rating. And if your players do manage to defeat one, they are worth 10,000 experience points. They are nothing to scoff at. They are strong, they are smart, and they are charismatic. And yet, for some reason, every time I try and run vampires in my campaign, they suck. Every time I encounter vampires in someone else's campaign, they suck. They're just not scary. Now, of course, when I say that vampires suck in Dungeons & Dragons, I am not referring to the amazing character that is Strahd von Zarovich. He is amazing. I mean, since the very first time Curse of Strahd was released in 1983, Strahd has been one of D&D's strongest and most terrifying villains that has ever existed. When you think of villains in D&D, if you've run Curse of Strahd, that's pretty much who you go to. I mean, he is incredible. And yet, every time I try to create a vampire villain, they're just terrible. They're not scary. They don't have that same weight. They don't have that same characteristic that Strahd had. And so I got to thinking, what am I missing? What am I doing? I have to be doing something wrong because my vampires, they're just not scary. So I've come up with 4 reasons why vampires suck and how you can fix them to make vampires truly terrifying and scary in your campaigns. So let's start with number 1. Reason number 1 that vampires suck in Dungeons & Dragons is that they have lame weaknesses. If you look on page 295 of the Monster Manual, which if you don't have it, I'm going to put a link in the description below where you can pick it up from a local game store because, you know, me, #support local. So you can pick it up there from that local game store, and it also supports the Halfling, so if you like me, make sure you do that. But the Monster Manual, if you look at vampires, they have admittedly some classic weaknesses, but they just seem out of place in Dungeons and Dragons. So some weaknesses for vampires are, of course, sunlight, but also running water. So vampires take damage if they end their turn in running water, which to some of you that might seem really odd. I'm going to explain why here in a second. Also, they have forbiddance, is what it's called. They cannot enter into a residence without first being invited in, which just seems dumb. You have this incredibly powerful being that gets stopped by your front door? Really? That just seems really lame. Next, of course, is the classic stake to the heart. Now, this weakness is different in that the stake doesn't actually kill the vampire. It paralyzes the vampire in Dungeons and Dragons. But still, if an adventurer manages to drive a stake or it says specifically any wooden weapon through the heart of a vampire while they are in their resting place, it can't just be anywhere. It can't be during a fight. It has to be while they are in their resting place. Then the vampire is paralyzed, which again seems like a really odd and lame weakness for an immortal, awesome being. Wood? Really? That's what we're going with. Okay. And then finally, they are chained to the grave. They have to return to their resting place during the day, which means that they really are chained to wherever it is that their body is buried or was originally buried. They have to return there every day, so they have to be within distance of it and be able to get there. Now, the reason for these weaknesses actually comes from vampire lore in England. So vampires have been around for a really long time, and pretty much every culture has had some kind of a vampire type evil entity. And I'm going to make an entire video about the history of vampires and how you can include that into your campaign. But that's a video for another time. Make sure that you like and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you know as soon as I release that video. It should be coming out in the next week or so. So all of these cultures have vampires, and it's kind of this blend of different cultural beliefs, but where we get our sense of our current cultural vampire is actually from England and from the European area. And in that area, there was a very strong Christian influence. Therefore, a lot of the weaknesses of vampires actually come from Christian tradition. Running water is a symbol for the Spirit of God, which is why running water would prevent a vampire from coming after you. So if you were running away, if you crossed running water, the vampire couldn't come after you because it was a symbol of the Spirit of God. That makes sense in Christianity. When you have a campaign setting that does not have that religion in it, these weaknesses can just seem lame. It was the same with a stake through the heart. It was often made out of yew wood, which is what they believed the cross was made out of. Again, a symbol for God. So you would take a stake, which would symbolize the cross, and you would drive it through the heart of a vampire, and it would kill that vampire. So that's running water, stake through the heart. Forbiddance is another one that comes from Christian tradition. So traditionally, the devil and evil spirits cannot come into your home or into a person's body for possession unless you invite them in, unless you willingly say that they're welcome in. Once you do that, they can come and go as they please. This is the same thing, goes back to the vampire, the evil spirits, evil eye, all of that, is that a vampire could not enter a home unless invited. After that point, they can come and go as they please, but it again comes from Christian tradition. So how are we supposed to take these lame weaknesses in D&D, even though they are perfectly valid weaknesses in the real world, given the tradition from which vampires came? In Dungeons and Dragons, they're just lame. And that's one of the reasons why vampires can seem weak. If you don't explain those weaknesses somehow, like Christian tradition did, if you don't explain them somehow in Dungeons and Dragons, it just seems like vampires are kind of dumb. It's like, oh, really? You can take out a huge army and suck blood of thousands of people, but you can't cross this little river? So you have to find a way to explain these weaknesses, and we'll talk about how you can do that towards the end of this video. Let's move on to reason number 2 why vampires suck. Reason number 2 that vampires suck in Dungeons and Dragons is often on us, DMs. It's poor storytelling. It's poor thought. We don't put a lot of thought into vampires because culturally we know vampires, but we don't really sit down and think about what an immortal being would do in their spare time. They have a lot of it. They can spend centuries planning something, and yet the best we come up with them is that they're terrorizing a little town and adventurers need to go and put them to rest. Really? That's the best we can do? Now, I say we because I'm guilty of this too. I think vampires are cool. I really like them. So I just throw one in for flavor. And it just takes away from the true terror that is a vampire. This should be an immortal, legendary being that is smart, that is cruel, that pays attention to details and really plans out and thinks for every eventuality and makes it nearly impossible for anyone to figure out their plans because there's so many layers to it. Now, it's easy to think of a vampire doing that. It's difficult for me as a not so clever sometimes person to figure out how in the world I'm going to do that in my own campaign setting. And it takes a lot of time and effort to plot out a vampire's plan. And really, if you're going to use a vampire, I would suggest making them the ultimate villain in your campaign because it is likely that that's the level that you're going to want to have for it to be truly terrifying. Now, of course, you can tease the end vampire with vampire spawn and undead and things like that that your players have to fight through. But the end one who is manipulating and figuring everything out, that requires a lot of work that sometimes, honestly, we're just not willing to put in. And it makes for a really lame, sucky vampire. When their schemes are mundane, low level, seems like when you stop and you look at the vampire and you go, that's it? That's all you wanted? Seriously? Okay. You know that you have not done the vampire justice. So, a lot of times, it's on us. It's a lame motivation. It's a lame plot. It's not thought through well. It's way too easy to figure out. Vampire plots should be really hard to figure out. We make it way too easy to figure out. And it ends up creating just a lame vampire. Also, as much as I love puns, obviously, I spent like an hour just looking up puns and coming up with puns for the intro to this. So I really hope you enjoyed that. Or hated it equally. I mean, that's the point. We, as DMs, tend to fall into cliches when we use vampires. And again, that's on us. Don't, even if you're trying to be funny, don't use cliches for vampires. It just comes across flat because that's what everyone's expecting, and it's just one-dimensional and kind of lame. Reason number 3 that vampires suck in Dungeons and Dragons kind of relates back to reason number 2, and it is that we make them too easy to kill, or we make them seem really weak. They're not easy to kill, and they're definitely not weak. They are a very, very strong villain, and you should be careful if you're going to use it to its full potential before you throw it at your party. There's a reason it's a challenge level 13. It's a very difficult creature, and yet we don't do our due justice, we don't look at it, and we make it come across as weak, and we make it easy for them to kill. We assume the cultural weaknesses of vampires apply to Dungeons and Dragons vampires, and we allow players just all of these options to kill them, and we make it too easy for them to find their final resting place and drive a stake through their heart and kill them that way. We just make it too easy. Now, I understand that there can be a difference between like a Strahd vampire and a much younger, perhaps not as smart in life kind of a vampire. I get that, and if you want to play with those levels of vampires, absolutely, that's perfectly fine. But if you're looking to make an epic, scary, end of campaign vampire, which is what I'm talking about, you cannot make it easy on your players. I know that you want them to get to that fight. You want them to get to that point. But part of vampires is their cunning and their trickiness and putting up layers and layers and layers of protection for themselves. So you have to basically be okay with that. Be okay with the fact that your players are probably not going to be able to find your vampire lair at first. And along with this, your players probably have a misconception that a vampire is really easy to kill. Again, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Freaking love that show, by the way. Anybody else love that show? Oh my gosh, so good. And Angel after. Your players probably think that vampires are really easy to kill. They just need a wooden stake, a little bit of holy water, find the crypt, stabby stabby, sprinkle sprinkle, good to go. Okay? So they probably have a misconception that they're weak as well, which you need to put to rest. Pardon the pun. I said I wouldn't do any more. I couldn't help it. I'm really sorry. But you need to make it very clear that a vampire is nothing to scoff at. I was going to say sneeze, so that sounded out weird. Is nothing to scoff at. They are a very, very dangerous enemy. And you can do that by using NPCs, using things in the area. The lair itself can really showcase how dangerous this villain is. Again, vampire lairs is coming up in another video. So again, subscribe, notification bell, so you don't miss that. We're going to build out a vampire lair, and it's going to be super fun, so don't miss that. These bodily embodiments of death and evil should not come across as weak. They should have this presence to them that is simply terrifying, and we'll get to how to do that in just a bit. Finally, number 4, why vampires tend to suck in Dungeons & Dragons 5e is that we, as Dungeon Masters and D&D, but also culture as a whole, has over-sexualized vampires. I mean, like, you don't even see vampires anymore that are truly evil and disgusting. Like, we've made them into these dark and brooding and sexy creatures of the night that are just misunderstood sex monsters. And, you know, it's not their fault that they're a vampire. It's not their fault that they have to drink blood to survive. And they're just misunderstood and sexy. When that is not what a vampire has been, literally up until our culture. We have, I mean, even Dracula. If you read Dracula, there's a little bit of sensualness there when it comes to the female vampires, but Dracula himself is never sexualized. It's never perceived anything that he's doing as, like, super sexual. We've done that, and I'm looking at you, 1992 Dracula movie. Good God. That was just a porno. Like, Honest to God, that was just a porno. I don't even understand how that had anything to do with Dracula. But we are so guilty of making vampires super over-sexualized. And it's not terrifying anymore. I mean, even my first encounter with vampires was Dracula. When I read Dracula when I was 12. I know, I'm a nerd, I get it. But I read Dracula when I was 12, and it was terrifying. It was horrifying to me as a child. And then my very next encounter with a vampire, the next time I truly remember like a vampire in the cultural things that I was watching, was in Digimon. That one Digimon vampire guy that like controlled the cat Digimon, that I forget what it is because it's been a really long time since I've watched it. But even that, in a kid's cartoon, was super sexual and like sexy, and yeah. We don't make them terrifying anymore. We make them like Twilight, where he's just a brooding teenager. Or we make them... There's so many examples. I can't even bring up all the examples, but you know what I'm talking about. They're not scary anymore. Vampires are just sexy and cool now. They're not scary. And so it rests on us as dungeon masters to bring back some of that terror. And to do that, you're going to want to lay off the sexiness. I'm sorry, but you're going to want to censor it a little bit. You're going to want to put that off to the side. And if your players are looking for that, have them, that's a totally different kind of role play. I would not make vampires sexy. It's just not scary. It's sexy. They're two different things. Unless, again, you're into that. No judgment. Whatevs. Just not at the table. So, what I'm trying to say is that culture has destroyed the vampire's reputation. Throughout folklore and culture, vampires have been nothing but horrible, disgusting, evil creatures. And we have flipped the script and turned them into something completely different. And if you are looking for a truly terrifying vampire villain for your campaign, you're gonna have to save the vampire reputation. And here's how we can do it. So how do we save the vampire reputation? Well, that's the next video. I'm sorry, this video is getting really, really long. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to split off how to save vampire reputations and make vampires scary again, and put that in the next video. So make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you get notified when I post that next video. And until next time, my friends, may your game have advantage. Halfling Hannah here, signing out.